Good morning. My name is Kemp Burdett, and this is It's Time for a Rethink. This morning's message is a call to the church to be a force for change and renewal in the world. We have just come through a week of political and unrest, both in the United States and also here in Canada. And so as I share this message with you this morning, these messages are prepared for people who have a desire to understand the scriptures and the role of the church in the world, maybe from what we might call a new perspective. And so this morning's message is entitled "A Force for Change and Renewal." In the New Testament, the church is the new movement of God in Jesus and the Spirit, set loose in the world to transform and renew the creation in love. To accomplish this, the posture of the church must be like that of a loving father who runs down the road to embrace his son after a period of estrangement and betrayal, says Jesus. Love, forgiveness, acceptance, and such are to be the way of this new movement of God. In order to transform the world in love, the church must not be afraid of the forces at work in the world, the powers that be. To carry out its mandate, it is necessary for the church to have a very clear sense of what it believes to be the strongest forces in the world. Jesus, not the Satan; good, not evil; love, not hatred. We must not be afraid to engage the world, and we must not withdraw from it. Jesus declared that he would build his church, and the gates of Hades, that is the gates of hell, would not prevail against it. In the words of the Christian writer Rob Bell, love wins. Love will prevail over hatred. Good will prevail over evil, making that which is unclean clean, making that which is considered unacceptable acceptable. The church is never to be afraid of being contaminated by its contact with the world. For the Spirit is a force in the world, making all things new. People often have a sense that between the Old Testament and the New Testament, the mission of God has changed, but they are not always clear as to what that transition is and what it means. This morning, in order to get a sense of the transition that occurs between the Old Testament and the New Testament, I want to compare two passages of Scripture that deal with the subject of cleanness, or being clean, and uncleanness, or unclean. That is, being acceptable and being unacceptable. In the Old Testament, the temple was the institution that embodied the practices and values and culture of the people of Israel. In the New Testament, it is the temple institution that is to be challenged and transformed and eventually removed in order to allow change to take place among the people of God in Israel and in all the world. In the Old Testament, in Haggai, not a familiar passage, it's one of the minor prophets. In Haggai chapter 2, verses 10 to 19, the question is raised as to how the process of becoming clean or unclean works in the temple system. First question: does that which is clean make things holy by coming into contact with them? The answer is no. That's not how the temple system works. Second question: does that which is unclean make things unclean by coming into contact with them? The answer is yes. That's how the temple system works. The temple system was a system of exclusion. As we move into the New Testament, we see a very different set of values at work in the person of Jesus. His movement was inclusive. In Matthew's Gospel, the 8th chapter and verses 1 to 4, Jesus is coming down from a mountain when he is met by a man who has leprosy. That is, he was unclean. The leper says, "Lord, if you choose, you can make me clean." Jesus' reply is, "I do choose. Be clean." Jesus reached out his hand and touched the leper, and the man's leprosy was removed. In the touch, Jesus challenged the whole temple system of what uncleanness or unacceptability or non-acceptance meant in Israel. What Jesus did was unthinkable in the mainstream of Jewish culture and society and in its religious structures. By touching the leper, Jesus should have been made unclean according to that system. But in the act of healing, however, it is demonstrated that the opposite, in fact, did occur. The leper became clean by the touch of Jesus. In the new movement of God in Jesus, Jesus is the stronger force at work in the world. Jesus then commanded the man to go and show himself to the priest and to offer the gift that Moses commanded as a testimony to them. And so we ask, who is the them? And the them is the priests and others who were the keepers of the religious system centered in the temple. And so we ask, what is the man required to go and show himself to the temple system? And the answer is to demonstrate that in what was done, a new system was now being put into effect by God that would replace the temple system and in turn change the culture and values and structures of Israel and the world itself. The church is the movement of God mandated to change the world in love and called to be a powerful force for reconciliation, inclusion, and change in the world. God in Jesus is making all things new. And so the church is called to believe and act. Do not be afraid, for greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world, says the scriptures. Go and change the world. God bless.